All right, so this is the story for today, again from Wise Words by Peter Leithart. This chapter 9 is called Blind Stranger. It was twilight on the winter night when he came down into the mountain village dressed all in black, eyes covered with a dark bandage. In his hand was a long white cane whose handle was coiled like a serpent. He tapped the cane lightly on the street as he walked. Villagers peered through the windows of their stone houses or opened their doors a crack to look at the stranger. His feet seemed to them to slither over the cobblestones as he shuffled past. One little boy, looking down from his bedroom, called loudly, "Mama, why does he have a bandage on his face?" In a stern whisper, his mother told him the man was blind, and it was not polite to talk about it. The stranger in black stopped at 4 houses to ask lodging for the night. At the first 3 houses, no one answered his knock. On the 4th house, he was greeted by a harsh voice that said, "Go away, we don't want you." Tapping his cane, the stranger continued to the middle of the village. At the village square, he stopped, cocked his head to the side, and listened. Following the sounds of laughter, he walked to the inn to ask for a room. As he walked in, the people inside stopped eating and drinking and fell silent. The innkeeper made an ugly face. "No rooms left," he grunted. "You could stay out in the room over the shed. It's dry, and you can have some straw for a bed. It'll be comfortable enough for you," he sneered. The stranger nodded, and the people of the inn watched as the innkeeper led him out of a side door toward the shed. The mayor, who was eating with the sheriff, was the first to break the silence. "Yeah, I don't like strangers in my town, and I don't like him. Blind people aren't like us, you know." "And say, did you see that cane? It looked like a snake," the innkeeper said when he returned. "Yeah, and we will have to keep an eye on him," the mayor muttered, nodding. The next day, however, everything was normal as the villagers returned to their work. Each day was pretty much the same in the small village in the mountains. The grown-ups worked together from sunrise to sunset while their children learned lessons in the whitewashed school shed. In the evening, they ate a hearty dinner, played or sang around the fire until bedtime, and slept soundly in the cold winter night. For his part, the stranger stayed in the shed beside the inn most of the time. Each evening, he would enter the inn, eat a thin bowl of soup for supper, walk around the village square, and return to the shed. Other than that, the villagers almost never saw him. No one knew what he did in the room above the shed all day, and before long, no one cared to know. Several months later, a terrible storm broke out in the mountain. Great boulders of hail fell from the black clouds. Lightning struck the steeple of the church, and the roof caught fire. Before it could be stopped, the fire had leaped to the roof of a nearby home, and then another and another. By the time the villagers were able to put out the fire, a third of the houses were destroyed. A town meeting was held the next day in the square. The priest encouraged the assembled villagers. "We've survived 2 disasters before, and with God's help, we can survive this too. God has given a chance to show our love for one another. Let's work together and rebuild our town." Most of the villagers were cheered by the priest's words, but the mayor had never liked the priest, because before him, the mayor felt like a sinner. When the priest spoke, the mayor whispered to the sheriff and cast suspicious glances toward the shed next to the inn. Only a week later, disease struck the villagers' animals, which they pastured in the valley below. All over the valley, the cows, sheep, and goats coughed up blood and fell over dead. By the end of the week, a third of the animals had died. The river, rippling through the valley, turned red with their blood. Another town meeting was hastily called, and the priest again spoke to the crowd. He urged them to fast and pray, to repent and humble themselves. He assured them of God's mercy and justice, and led them in a hymn of praise. With the last chord of the hymn still hanging on the mountain air, the mayor stepped in front of the crowd and motioned for silence. "We thank you, Father, for your words of comfort," he said with a broad smile. "But we need more than comfort. We need a solution. To arrive at a solution, we need to understand the problem." The villagers listened intently. "Think carefully now," the mayor continued. "When did these terrible plagues begin? And what else happened about the same time?" Whispers, some of them bitter, rippled through the crowd. That's right, said the mayor. That stranger, that blind stranger, came into our village only a short while before the fire. And now our animals are dying. Tell me, neighbors, do you think that was a coincidence? From the back of the crowd, someone who sounded a lot like the sheriff shouted very loudly, No! Some in the crowd nodded vigorously. Others looked puzzled. The village smithy raised his hand to speak. Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I haven't seen that stranger do anything wrong. Why, just the other day he stopped to talk to my little girl on one of his walks. He asked her age and what size clothes she wears. He was trying to get an idea of how big she is, since he can't see it all. She said he seemed real nice. Others murmured the same thing had happened to their children. The mayor interrupted before the smithy could finish. He's been talking to our sons and daughters, and you think that's nice, do you? Well, I will tell you what I think. I think he's planning to harm them. That's what I think. Several voices shouted in agreement, and the smithy tried to speak again, but the voices got louder. Confused and angry, he looked at the crowd and sat down. The priest stood again, trying to be heard. Come, my children, he said, when the shouting stopped. You are suspicious for nothing. The stranger has nothing to do with the evil things that have been happening. I've talked with him many times, and I can tell you he's a kind and generous man. Perhaps these things have happened because we have not treated him well. We have not shown him hospitality. He came to us, and we have not received him. Aha! The mayor's voice boomed out. You have gotten to know him? And what have you two been planning together? The mayor had gone too far this time. Suspicious though the villagers were, the priest had been their faithful friend and shepherd for longer than most could remember. If anyone could be trusted, surely it was he. Realizing the crowd had turned against him, the mayor snorted loudly and walked away shouting, Well, we will see. We shall see. The next months were quiet. The last cold of the mountain winter melted into spring, and the villagers went back to work and play and rest and worship. As the weather warmed, the church and the burned houses were rebuilt. Healthy goats, sheep, and cattle were born. The troubles of the past began to seem far away. The calm was broken one spring afternoon by a scream. The villagers stopped what they were doing and looked in the direction of the inn. There, they saw the innkeeper's wife running around the town square wildly, waving her arms. Soon everyone had gathered around her. Between sobs, she tried to explain, She's gone, my daughter. I put her down for a nap, and now she's gone. Immediately, the villagers spread out to search for the little lost girl. They searched every street and alley, every store, every house, every garden, but the innkeeper's daughter could not be found. Villager after villager returned from the search with bad news. As the mob grew, the mayor climbed the inn's porch and began to speak. Do you remember what I told you? Didn't I tell you that our children would be harmed? The mob remembered. The mayor continued, I have been talking with the innkeeper's wife. I think you'll be interested in what she told me. Yesterday, she saw her daughter with, guess who? Our blind stranger. The mob gasped as one man. And now her daughter is gone. How long will we let this go on? No more, the mob shouted. Bring him down. Let's stop this now. The mayor motioned to the sheriff, who took two men and ran into the shed. A few minutes later, they returned dragging the blind stranger. The sight of his black clothes and serpent-like cane, the mob shouts grew louder. Oh, we found him knitting, the sheriff announced. Knitting? Cried the mayor. Knitting? Do you know what kind of men knit? Asked the school teacher. Sorcerers, magicians, and witches knit, isn't that right? The teacher nodded wisely. Why, the stranger must be a conjurer, a witch, as well as the stealer of children. Drive out the witch, the mob screamed. The priest had climbed the steps, trying desperately to speak. Please, stop this madness, he pleaded. Drive out the witch, the crowd chanted. Why? Screamed the priest. What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more. Drive out the witch, drive out the witch. The priest turned to the judge, who had come from working in his garden. Can't you stop this? The priest asked. Raising his hands in a shrug, the judge said, I wash my hands of the matter. The The mob began to shout. With an effort, the priest quieted them. The priest said, "I tell you, this man is innocent of all wrong," he said. "And if you continue to demand that he leave our village, I will go with him." At this, the mob became silent and uncomfortable. They thought of the children the priest had baptized, of the boys and girls he had taught, of the widows and orphans he had comforted. They thought of his preaching and breaking bread. How could they live without their priest? The mayor spoke again. "My friends, I know how much you love our priest, but can we trust a priest who would defend a sorcerer? Perhaps the priest too is a child snatcher. Perhaps we would be better off without him as well." From the back of the mob, someone cried out, "Drive out the witch! Drive out the witch!" Quietly at first, and louder, the mob joined in the chant. "I warn you, if I leave today, I will never return," the priest shouted over the din. "Drive out the priest! Drive out the priest!" the mob answered. Sadly, the priest walked down the steps of the inn, the blind stranger beside him. The people parted, and the two passed through. As they walked through the mob, the smithy's daughter spat on them. Toward the edge of the village, the road became rockier. The priest held the stranger's arm to steady him, and they went past the last houses. Soon, the two figures had disappeared from around a turn on the mountain path. Driven by anger, the crowd hurried to the blind stranger's room. As they searched through the room above the shed, the villagers found dozens of knitted children's sweaters and caps in all sizes and colors. The innkeeper's daughter was found later that day. She had sneaked from her room into the barn next door and had fallen behind the haystack. Except for an ugly bruise in her head and a twisted knee, she was fine. 40 days after the priest and the blind stranger left, a rock slide buried the entire village. Not one stone was left upon another, which was not torn down. Moral: he who gives an answer before he hears, it is folly and shame to him. Proverbs 18, verse 13. Again, he who gives an answer before he hears, it is folly and shame to him. Proverbs 18, verse 13. All right, so that's the end of Blind Stranger, our story for today. All right, thanks. We'll see you guys later.